The Jewish quarter of the Old City. There is a slope just outside of the Jewish quarter. It is known as the City of David, and it is the biblical city of Jerusalem. It is the ancient Canaanite city of Jerusalem, mentioned in the Bible and in history. When you read the story of Jerusalem in the Bible and in ancient historical documents, it is referring to that slope. There's a number of reasons why we know this. For starters, that is where all the finds from the time of the Canaanite period in Jerusalem are. That is where all the structures they found there are from. And it's only in later, and it seems to be this, and it's where all the administrative buildings from the time of Judah have been found. Now, one of the most controversial structures in the city of David is the building I'm in right now. This could be the palace of King David. Now, how do we know this is David's palace? Truth is, we're not 100% sure. There is debate among archaeologists about whether or not this is indeed the palace of David. Archaeologists refer to it as a stone-stepped structure. So, what are the arguments for this place being the palace of David? For starters, it was found by using the Bible to find the palace of David. So Alat Mazar, Alat Mazar, who is the archaeologist who excavated this place, was looking for the palace of King David. She said, okay. She looked at where it said the palace of David was. It said it was built by Hiram, king of Tyre. And it was built it would have been built by Hiram, king of Tyre, as a gift to David. And it mentions that when the Philistines invaded shortly after David became king, that he went outside of the city of David, and went down, and he left the palace and went to his fortress. So, a lot of people are of the opinion that the old ancient tell of the city of David may have been centered on the mount, on the Temple Mount, and have gone down to the city of David. It would have been understood that this palace would have been outside of the fortress, outside of the main fortifications of the city of Jerusalem at the time of David. So David would have had a major center here, but the palace would have been on what is today the Temple Mount. Based on that understanding, she went to the people who were working here. It was the main tourist information center of Jerusalem at the time, and she told them, "You need to move your house. You need to move your building, because this underneath your feet is a palace of David." So, when she dug down, this is what she found: this large stone step structure. And based on some of the pottery finds, which would have been dated to the 10th century BC, it would have placed this palatial structure, as being built at the time of David. So, excuse me, let me just get out of this tour group. So this structure would have been dated to the time of David. So, for the arguments for this place being the Palace of David, it's right where the Bible said the Palace of David was supposed to be. It's outside of the city of outside of the main tell of Jerusalem. The Temple Mount is clearly a tell, based on its shape and everything. It has pottery shards that have been found that dated a large palatial structure to the 10th century BCE, which we know based on historical chronologies, based on Assyrian texts and biblical accounts of the length of the reign of the kings of Judah, would be around the time of King David. So you found a big, large palatial structure from the time of David in Jerusalem, where the Bible says the palace of David was. It's the palace of David. So that would be the argument. Now, there are contrary opinions, and I will show you some of the evidence for the contrary opinions in just one moment. So, contrary opinions, and by the way, There is, I'm not sure that's original or replica. That is a pillar in very much the Judean style, a Proto-Ionic pillar in the Judean style. It's actually very unique. It has Phoenician influence, but it's actually very unique to Judah. The northern Israelite ones would actually not have those two circles, if I recall correctly, and be much simpler. It's a very Judean style. That being said, it is worth noting that there are contrary opinions to this. Here's the thing: Jerusalem is very problematic for archaeologists, just overall. So whenever people are questioning that this is the Palace of David, that is not they're being overly skeptical. It's that Jerusalem is just a very hard place to do archaeology. Because Jerusalem has not had a lot of destruction layers like other places, a single layer could be like 200 years apart. So so one of the alternative theories, and this is a large stone step structure. These are the steps, as you can see. We do not know with 100% certainty if this structure was built. They've not found an olive pit, from what I understand. If they found an olive pit from the 10th century BCE under one of these stones, that would clearly say this structure was built at the time of David. It has also been suggested it may have been built later, because remember, even if it is David's palace, it would have functioned as an administrative center until the city of Jerusalem was destroyed by the Babylonians. So maybe it was built later. Maybe it was built in the time of Hezekiah, which is what Finkelstein says. He points out that the pottery was not found in situ, that the pottery may have been from another fill. It may have been from a later date. He also pointed out that this could have been built later. Now, even if it was built later, David's palace could have been built on top of it. This is not a unique problem to this one site in Jerusalem. This is a very common problem this is a very common problem in Jerusalem with archaeology. A lot of things have been built down into bedrock. And so as a result, there is no layers. We don't find anything to help date the structures. So something could be built by Herod the Great, or it could have been built by King David, and even if it was built by King David, you're gonna find stuff by Herod the Great if it's built into bedrock. Remember, that stuff stays there forever. Also, these structures would have lasted quite a while, so we know this place would have existed around the time of the destruction of the Babylonians. It would have functioned as an administrative center, but when was it built? Was all the stuff David had scraped away? Was it, and that's why we're not finding anything? Or maybe it wasn't David's palace at all. Maybe it was a later structure. And it is a legitimate, serious question. In fact, if you want to know where they think most of the stuff from the city of David and the city of Solomon are, I'll show you. Right in there. That is the Valley of Kidron. Jerusalem has been destroyed multiple times, and that valley is actually even deeper than you realize. It should be 30 feet deeper. Why is it so high? Because everything got scraped off of Jerusalem every time it was destroyed and rebuilt, and was thrown into there, and now we don't know the stratigraphy anymore. And we just have the foundation stones, which we now cannot, with 100% certainty, date. We might have educated guesses, but it is a common problem in Jerusalem. So, yes, this place could be the Palace of David. Even those who deny it, archaeologically, would say it is a real possibility. That this stone structure, especially was built by the Canaanites, it still could have been used to uphold David's palace, or it could have been just built later. Maybe David's palace was elsewhere. David would have needed a house, and largely it is mainstream opinion that David did exist. So if this isn't David's palace, it existed somewhere. We found mentions of the house of David in the Tel Dan inscription. We found evidence of it. We found evidence of a kingdom in the city of Judah in the 10th century BCE, centered around Jerusalem, the time of David. So there was a city of David. So there was a palace of David. Whether or not it was here is another question entirely. So excuse me. So just a few more spiritual thoughts about this structure. This is the Palace of David. There's the bedrock you see where things were cut down into it. Yeah, I want to say two things for us as David. Two things about David for us as Tradcasts. For starters, David, in many ways, I compared with him before, was like the Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre in his day. He actually, or Pope Pius, or he is a prime example of what I recognize and resist is a legitimate position to hold as a Catholic. David, under the time of King Saul, had to recognize Saul as king, which he did. He had to respect him. David felt guilty for even cutting off the hem of a garment of King Saul as Saul was trying to kill him. He had profound respect for King Saul. And later, but he's also a good example of why you can and should resist authority sometimes and call it out when it is corrupt. Think about the prophet Nathan. When David committed adultery. This is the Palace of David. This is from the roof. Up there's the cafe. You can look down. You can look down right from over here and see where David was watching Bathsheba bathe. Bible says he saw her bathing on the roof. Looking down, right there would have been Uriah's house somewhere. And he summoned her, lay with her, illegitimate child, killed poor Uriah to cover it all up. This is where that betrayal of God's law happened by King David. The response of the prophet Nathan was not to shut your mouth and say, oh, I would respect him, David as king, even if he was the devil incarnate, and just shut my mouth and do whatever I'm told. How dare you criticize David? That was not God's response. That was not the prophet Nathan's response. God told the prophet Nathan, go tell David, I'm angry with you, and there are going to be consequences. And he convicted David of his sins. That is what we as Tradcasts need to do. People who radically defend things that Pope Francis has done, in John Paul, like with Pachamama and Fiducia Supplicans, John Paul II with the CC 2 and 3, Paul VI with endless ecumenism. I hear some radical defenders of these popes saying, Saint Catherine of Siena said that even if the Pope was the devil, I would still respect him and just do as I'm told. That is not what Nathan the prophet did. That is not what the Apostle Paul did with Peter, who called out Peter to his face. First Pope. That is not biblical. That is not what God called David to do. That is not how God handled Saul. That is not God handled David. That is not how they were called to handle David. That's not how these leaders chosen by God directly were called to be handled. They were to be called out. You still respected them in their position, but when they did wrong, you acknowledged they did it wrong. You don't explain it away. No excuses. Also, David was the author of many of the Psalms. And we as Tradcasts, St. Louis de Montfort said the fulfillment of the Psalms in the New Testament is the Rosary. Just as the Old Testament was perfected in the Gospel, so the Psalms the Old Testament praises were perfected with the rosary. Because when we say the rosary, we say the Psalms with and through the Blessed Virgin Mother of God. Say the rosary every day. Pray it often. Pray for the conversion of modernists in the Catholic Church. Pray it for the conversion of Protestants and all unbelievers. Pray the rosary every day. The reason we as Tract don't do the Luminous Mysteries is because it throws out the number of the Hail Marys. When you say the original, joyful, sorrowful, and glorious mysteries, you end up saying 150 Hail Marys. That corresponds with 150 Psalms that were authored by King David himself. So anyway, God bless. Have a great day. If you ever get a chance in real life, please check out at SSPX, Society of St. Pius X Church. This is, here I am, calling you from the Palace of King David. God bless.